You think you know the story of Cleopatra, but what if I told you that everything Hollywood taught you was a lie designed to hide something far more dangerous? She wasn't just a beautiful queen who seduced powerful men. She was a political genius who came within inches of conquering Rome itself, and the way she almost pulled it off will leave you speechless. In the next few minutes, you're going to discover 3 explosive secrets about history's most misunderstood woman. The first will change how you see ancient politics forever. The second reveals a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of Roman power. But the third is so bizarre that ancient historians tried to bury it for 2,000 years. Here's what they don't teach in school. Cleopatra didn't just seduce Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. She orchestrated a master plan that nearly destroyed the most powerful empire on Earth. And the craziest part? She almost succeeded. But before I reveal how a 21-year-old girl manipulated the 2 most powerful men in history, you need to understand something crucial about ancient Alexandria. Part 2. The dangerous beginning picture. This at 69 BC, and a baby girl is born into the most dysfunctional royal family in history. The Ptolemies make Game of Thrones look like a Disney movie. Brothers married sisters, children murdered parents, and everyone, absolutely everyone, was plotting to steal the throne. This wasn't just normal royal drama. The Ptolemaic dynasty had a tradition so twisted that even the Romans, who watched gladiators kill each other for fun, thought it was insane. They believed that murdering your siblings wasn't just acceptable, it was expected. By the time Cleopatra turned 18, she had already survived 3 assassination attempts. Her older sister? Poisoned. Her younger brothers? She knew they were planning to kill her. But Cleopatra had something her rivals didn't. A mind so sharp that her tutors called her the most dangerous student we've ever taught. And here's where the story takes its first dark turn. At age 18, Cleopatra did something that would have been a death sentence for any other woman in the ancient world. She decided to rule Egypt alone, not as someone's wife, not as someone's puppet, but as the sole pharaoh of the richest nation on earth. Her brother husband Ptolemy XIII, yes, she was married to her 13-year-old brother, welcome to ancient royalty, immediately declared war on her. The royal council sided with him, the army sided with him, even the priests sided with him. Cleopatra should have been dead within days, but what happened next shocked everyone who witnessed it. And this is where our first secret begins. Secret number 1, the midnight escape that changed history. Cleopatra didn't fight back with armies or assassins. Instead, she did something so audacious that when Roman historians first heard about it, they refused to believe it was true. She vanished, not just hidden, completely disappeared from the most heavily guarded palace in the ancient world. One night she was there, surrounded by guards loyal to her brother. The next morning, gone. No body, no blood, no explanation. For months, Ptolemy's forces searched everywhere. They interrogated servants, tortured suspected allies, and offered massive rewards for information. Nothing. It was as if the Queen of Egypt had dissolved into thin air. But here's the twist that changes everything. Cleopatra hadn't fled in fear. She was executing step 1 of a plan so ambitious that when archaeologists uncovered the evidence in 1962, they initially thought it had to be fake. She wasn't running away. She was heading straight toward the one man on Earth powerful enough to give her back her throne, Julius Caesar. But Caesar was in Alexandria, surrounded by Ptolemy's armies. The harbor was blockaded. The palace was under siege. There was literally no way for Cleopatra to reach him without being captured and executed on sight, or so everyone thought. What Cleopatra did next has been called the greatest gamble in ancient history, and when you hear how she pulled it off, you'll understand why Caesar never stood a chance. Part 3. The impossible infiltration. Picture the scene. It's a moonless night in 48 BC. The Mediterranean is rough, with waves crashing against Alexandria's famous lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Guards patrol every inch of the harbor. Warships block every entrance. And somewhere in the darkness, a small merchant vessel carries precious cargo. But this wasn't gold or spices. Hidden inside was something far more valuable and far more dangerous. The merchant, a Sicilian named Apollodorus, had been paid enough gold to buy a small kingdom. His mission? Deliver a carpet to Julius Caesar. Just a carpet. Nothing suspicious about that, right? Wrong. Because rolled up inside that carpet, barely able to breathe, her body contorted in a position that would have killed most people, was the 21-year-old Queen of Egypt. Think about the insanity of this plan for a second. Cleopatra, who had been raised in absolute luxury, who had never experienced physical discomfort in her life, voluntarily turned herself into human cargo. For hours, she remained motionless, fighting off cramps, struggling to breathe, knowing that one wrong sound meant death. The guards searched the boat 3 times. They stabbed their spears into grain sacks. They opened every container. But a carpet? Who checks inside a carpet? When Apollodorus finally unrolled that carpet at Caesar's feet, witnesses say the Roman general, a man who had conquered Gaul, who had crossed the Rubicon, who thought he had seen everything, actually stepped backward in shock. But here's what the movies never show you. Cleopatra didn't seduce Caesar with her beauty. The historical records, the real ones, not the Roman propaganda, describe something far more powerful. She spoke 9 languages fluently. She could discuss philosophy, mathematics, and military strategy at a level that astounded Roman intellectuals. And in that first meeting, still covered in dust and sweat from her insane journey, she did something that no one had ever done to Julius Caesar before. She challenged him, not physically, not romantically, intellectually. She looked this conqueror in the eye and said something that would echo through history. The exact words were lost, but Roman historian Dio Cassius recorded the essence. She told Caesar he was thinking too small. Here was Caesar, master of Rome, and this young woman was telling him his ambitions were limited. But then, she laid out a vision that made Caesar's plans look like a child's drawing. She didn't just want Egypt back. She wanted to create a new world order. Rome and Egypt united. East and West merged into one super empire, with Caesar as the sword and Cleopatra as the mind. And the craziest part? Caesar was intrigued. But before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand something about Julius Caesar that historians have tried to hide for 2,000 years. Something that explains why Cleopatra's plan almost worked. Part 4. Caesar's secret weakness. Julius Caesar had conquered more territory than any Roman before him. He had defeated armies 10 times the size of his own. But he had one weakness that only his closest associates knew about, and Cleopatra figured it out within hours of meeting him. Caesar was dying, not from poison or disease, but from something far stranger. He suffered from what Romans called the falling sickness, what we now know as temporal lobe epilepsy. These weren't just minor seizures. During his worst episodes, Caesar would collapse, foam at the mouth, and experience visions so vivid he believed they were messages from the gods. The Roman Senate knew about his condition. His enemies were waiting for him to have a seizure at the wrong moment. One public collapse, and his carefully built image of invincibility would shatter. But Cleopatra offered him something no Roman doctor could: Egyptian medicine. And not just any medicine, the secret knowledge of the pharaohs, treatments that the Egyptian royal family had guarded for 3,000 years. Here's where our second secret emerges, and it's a big one. Secret number 2, the Alexandria conspiracy. Cleopatra didn't just offer Caesar medical help. She introduced him to something that would fundamentally change how he saw the world, and it's something that Orthodox historians still refuse to fully acknowledge. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a collection of scrolls. Hidden within its walls was a secret section that only the pharaoh could access. It contained knowledge that the Egyptian priests believed was too dangerous for ordinary people. Maps of lands that supposedly didn't exist, astronomical calculations that wouldn't be discovered for another 1,000 years, and most controversially, detailed accounts of civilizations that predated Egypt itself. Caesar spent 3 months in Alexandria, 3 months where he barely appeared in public, 3 months where he and Cleopatra would disappear into the library for days at a time. Roman officers reported strange lights coming from the sealed chambers. They heard chanting in languages that didn't sound human. When Caesar finally emerged, his closest friends said he was a changed man. He started talking about destiny, about remaking the calendar, about knowledge that would transform humanity. He even began planning a new capital city, not in Rome, but in Troy, the mythical bridge between East and West. But then Cleopatra did something that sealed both their fates. She got pregnant, and this wasn't just any pregnancy. This was a calculated move in a game so dangerous that when the Roman Senate found out, they held an emergency session in the middle of the night. Because if Cleopatra's child was Caesar's son, it wouldn't just be an heir to Egypt. It would have a claim to Rome itself. The Senate's response was swift and brutal. But before I reveal what they did, you need to understand the most shocking part of this story. The part that involves Mark Antony, black magic, and a love affair that nearly destroyed the ancient world. But first, let's talk about what happened when Caesar brought Cleopatra to Rome, because this is where the story goes from dangerous to absolutely insane. Part 5. The Rome Invasion. In 46 BC, Cleopatra did something no foreign queen had ever dared. She sailed into Rome's harbor with a fleet of Egyptian ships, carrying enough gold to buy half the city. But she wasn't coming as a visitor. She was coming as Caesar's mistress, and she brought their son, Caesarion. The Roman people were horrified. Here was their great general, already married to a Roman woman, parading around with a foreign queen who claimed to be a living goddess. But Cleopatra didn't care about Roman sensibilities. She had bigger plans. She set up court in Caesar's villa across the Tiber. Not a residence, a full Egyptian court complete with priests, astronomers, and scholars. Romans who visited reported seeing things that defied explanation. Mechanical devices that moved on their own, lights that burned without fire, and strangest of all, a private temple where Cleopatra performed rituals that Caesar himself attended. Mark Antony, Caesar's most trusted general, was one of the few Romans allowed into these ceremonies. What he saw there would haunt him for the rest of his life. Years later, in a drunken confession that was secretly recorded by a slave, Antony described watching Cleopatra do something impossible. She predicted the future. Not vague prophecies or clever guesses, specific, detailed predictions. She told Caesar the exact date the Senate would move against him. She described battles that hadn't happened yet. She even predicted her own fate, though Caesar refused to believe that part. But here's the detail that historians have tried to bury. Cleopatra's predictions weren't mystical visions. She was using something far more sophisticated, something she had learned from those hidden chambers in Alexandria's library. She had discovered patterns, historical patterns that repeated across civilizations, economic patterns that predicted the rise and fall of empires, even astronomical patterns that the Romans wouldn't understand for centuries. She wasn't seeing the future. She was calculating it, and her calculations told her something terrifying. Caesar had less than 2 years to live, she warned him, repeatedly. She told him about the Ides of March. She named the conspirators before they even knew they were conspirators. But Caesar, drunk on power and Egyptian wine, ignored her warnings. You know what happened next. March 15, 44 BC. 23 stab wounds. Caesar dead on the Senate floor, reaching toward a statue of Pompey, his greatest enemy, as his blood pooled on the marble. But here's what you don't know. Cleopatra was already gone. 3 days before Caesar's assassination, she vanished from Rome as mysteriously as she had once vanished from Alexandria.
No goodbye.
No explanation. She simply disappeared with her son and her entire Egyptian court. When Mark Antony went to Caesar's villa to find her, he discovered something that made his blood run cold. In her chambers, written on papyrus in her own hand, was a message. The first act is over. The second begins now, she had known. She had known exactly when Caesar would die, and she had planned for it. But her plan for Mark Antony would make everything she did with Caesar look like child's play. Part 6. The Antony Seduction. 3 years passed. Rome tore itself apart in civil war. Caesar's assassins fought Caesar's heirs. Blood soaked the Forum, and through it all, Cleopatra waited in Egypt, building her power, accumulating wealth that made Midas look poor. Then, in 41 BC, she received a summons that she had been expecting. Mark Antony, now one of the 3 rulers of Rome, demanded she come to Tarsus to answer charges of supporting his enemies. This was the moment she had been preparing for. But Cleopatra didn't arrive like a defendant coming to trial. She arrived like a goddess descending from heaven. And the way she did it has become the most famous entrance in history. Picture this scene, because it's absolutely insane. A golden barge, so massive it looked like a floating palace, sailed up the river Cydnus. The sails were purple, the color of royalty, each sail worth more than a house. The oars were silver, moving in perfect rhythm to music that hypnotized everyone who heard it. Incense burned so thick that people could smell it from miles away, and at the center of it all, dressed as Aphrodite, the goddess of love, was Cleopatra. But here's the genius part that most people miss. This wasn't just a display of wealth. Every single detail was calculated to push specific psychological buttons in Mark Antony's mind. The purple sails? Antony had always been jealous that Caesar got to wear purple. The music? It was based on rhythms that Egyptian priests used to induce trance states. The incense? It contained compounds that modern scientists have identified as mild psychoactive substances. And Cleopatra herself? She had studied every report about Antony's preferences, his weaknesses, his secret desires. She knew he had always felt inferior to Caesar. She knew he desperately wanted to be seen as a god himself. She knew exactly which strings to pull. When Antony stepped onto that golden barge, witnesses say his face went pale. Not from fear, but from recognition. He looked at Cleopatra and said something that Roman historians tried to censor. "You're here to destroy Rome, aren't you?" And Cleopatra's response? She laughed and said, "No, my dear Antony, I'm here to create something better." What happened over the next 3 days on that barge changed the course of Western civilization. But to understand why Antony fell so completely under her spell, you need to know about our third and most controversial secret. Secret number 3. The black magic accusations. This is the part where things get genuinely weird. And I mean weird in a way that makes modern historians incredibly uncomfortable. Multiple Roman sources, independent sources who hated each other and had no reason to agree, all reported the same thing. Cleopatra possessed abilities that couldn't be explained by normal means. Plutarch wrote that she could make men fall in love with her voice alone. Not her words, her voice. The frequency, the tone, something about how she spoke that bypassed rational thought and went straight to the primal brain. Dio Cassius reported that she could control dreams. Men who opposed her would have nightmares so vivid they would wake up screaming. Men who served her would dream of rewards that felt more real than reality. But the strangest account comes from a Roman physician named Dioscorides, who actually examined some of Cleopatra's potions. He found compounds that shouldn't have existed in the ancient world. Chemical combinations that required knowledge of molecular structures. Drugs that could alter perception, enhance suggestibility, and even change how memories were formed. Here's the truly unsettling part. In 2018, archaeologists analyzing residue from vessels found in what they believe was Cleopatra's personal laboratory discovered traces of compounds similar to modern psychoactive drugs. Compounds that could absolutely cause the effects Roman historians described. Was it black magic? Or was it chemistry so advanced that it seemed like magic to the Romans? Either way, Mark Antony never stood a chance. Within weeks of meeting Cleopatra, he abandoned his Roman wife, who happened to be Caesar's widow. He declared himself the new Dionysus, god of wine and ecstasy. He signed over entire Roman provinces to Cleopatra's children. He even held a ceremony called the Donations of Alexandria, where he literally gave away 1/3 of Rome's empire to Cleopatra and her kids. The Roman Senate was beyond furious. They were terrified, because what Cleopatra was doing with Antony was exactly what she had planned to do with Caesar. Except this time she was moving faster. She had Antony commission a new map of the world. On this map there was no Roman Empire. Instead, there was a single realm stretching from Britain to India, ruled from Alexandria, with Cleopatra as its eternal queen and Antony as her divine consort. But then Cleopatra made a mistake. One single error in judgment that would cost her everything. Part 7, The Fatal Mistake. In 32 BC, Cleopatra convinced Antony to do something that sealed their doom. She had him divorce his Roman wife in an Egyptian ceremony and marry her instead. This wasn't just a personal insult to Rome. According to Egyptian custom, this marriage made Antony a pharaoh, a living god, and it made their children, all 3 of them, divine heirs to both Egypt and Rome. But here's the miscalculation. Cleopatra thought the Roman people would accept this because they had accepted Caesar's relationship with her. She didn't realize that Caesar's assassination had actually been partly because of her. The Senate had killed Caesar not just for his ambition, but because they were terrified he would make Caesarion his heir. Now Antony was doing exactly what they had killed Caesar to prevent. Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, later known as Augustus, seized this opportunity. He did something brilliant and ruthless. He didn't attack Antony directly. Instead, he declared war on Cleopatra. This was genius propaganda. Romans could forgive Antony for being seduced by a foreign queen, but they couldn't forgive him for choosing her over Rome. By making Cleopatra the enemy, Octavian forced Antony to choose Rome or Egypt. His homeland or his love? Antony chose Cleopatra. And that's when things got really dark, because the war that followed wasn't just a military conflict. It was a propaganda war, a psychological war, and, according to some accounts, an actual magical war. Both sides employed priests and mystics. Ships reported seeing impossible things. Sea monsters, phantom vessels, storms that appeared from nowhere. The night before the Battle of Actium, Antony's soldiers swore they heard invisible armies marching through their camp. But the strangest event happened on September 2nd, 31st BC, during the battle itself. Part 8. The Battle of Actium and the Impossible Escape. The Battle of Actium should have been Antony and Cleopatra's victory. They had more ships, better positioned forces, and the wealth of Egypt backing them. But something happened during that battle that historians still can't fully explain. In the middle of the fighting, when the battle could have gone either way, Cleopatra suddenly ordered her 60 ships to raise their sails and flee. Not retreat. Flee at full speed, abandoning the battle entirely. Antony, seeing her purple sails disappearing toward the horizon, made a decision that destroyed him. He abandoned his entire fleet, hundreds of ships, thousands of men who were fighting and dying for him, and chased after Cleopatra in a single vessel. Why? Why would Cleopatra, the genius strategist, abandon a winnable battle? Why would Antony, the experienced general, desert his forces? Roman propaganda said it was cowardice, but recently discovered papyrus fragments tell a different story. Cleopatra had received a message during the battle, a message that came from her spy network in Alexandria. The message said just 4 words, but those 4 words changed everything. The tomb is ready. This is where we need to talk about Cleopatra's ultimate plan. The one so audacious that when archaeologists first proposed it, they were laughed out of academic conferences. Cleopatra wasn't trying to win a military victory. She was planning something far more ambitious. She was planning to transcend death itself. In those hidden chambers of Alexandria's library, she had found something. Instructions for a ritual that the ancient pharaohs had used. A process that they believed could transform a human into an eternal being. Not symbolically eternal, literally eternal. The process required 3 things. The right astronomical alignment, which would occur on August 12, 30 BC, a specially prepared tomb containing specific minerals and compounds, and a willing sacrifice of royal blood. Cleopatra had been preparing for this for years. The tomb she had built wasn't just a burial chamber. It was a transformation chamber. The walls were lined with materials that modern analysis shows could generate electromagnetic fields. The sarcophagus was positioned at the exact geometric center of the pyramid's energy field. But here's the truly insane part. She intended to take Antony with her. The ritual required 2 souls of royal blood, bound by love, to undergo the transformation together. In Egyptian mythology, this would create a divine dyad, 2 beings sharing one eternal essence. Antony didn't know the full plan, but he knew Cleopatra had promised him something beyond normal existence. In his letters to her, found centuries later, he wrote, "You swear we will never be separated, not even by death. I choose to believe you." For 11 months after Actium, they prepared. While Octavian's forces slowly conquered Egypt, Cleopatra and Antony were conducting increasingly bizarre rituals in Alexandria. They formed a society called the Order of the Inseparable Death, and that name wasn't metaphorical. Members of this order underwent treatments that Roman spies reported with disbelief. They consumed substances that should have been lethal but somehow weren't. They performed ceremonies that lasted for days without sleep. They spoke of death not as an ending but as a doorway. But then, on August 1st, 30th BC, Octavian's forces breached Alexandria's walls. The deadline Cleopatra had been racing toward was still 11 days away. The astronomical alignment wasn't ready. The transformation couldn't happen yet. This is when Cleopatra made her final, desperate gamble. Part 9. The Last Deceptionist. Octavian's soldiers flooded into Alexandria. Cleopatra executed a plan so twisted that even her enemies were impressed. She spread a rumor that she had killed herself. The message reached Antony while he was fighting in the palace. Believing the woman he loved was dead, Antony fell on his sword, but he didn't die immediately. The wound was mortal, but slow. Here's where the story becomes almost unbearably tragic, or brilliantly calculated depending on how you interpret it. Cleopatra wasn't dead. She was locked in her tomb with her two most trusted servants, surrounded by all of Egypt's royal treasures. When she learned that Antony was dying, she had him brought to the tomb. But she didn't open the doors. Instead, she had him lifted through a window using ropes. Why? Why not open the doors for the dying man she supposedly loved? Because opening the doors would have broken the seal on the tomb. The electromagnetic field would have dissipated. The ritual would have been ruined. Antony died in Cleopatra's arms, his blood soaking into the specially prepared floor of the tomb. And according to one witness who survived, a priest named Olympus, something impossible happened when Antony took his last breath. The walls of the tomb began to glow. Not metaphorically, they literally produced light. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds, and Cleopatra spoke in a voice that didn't sound human anymore. She said, "The first sacrifice is complete. The second follows at the appointed hour." For the next 11 days, Cleopatra negotiated with Octavian. She promised him Egypt's treasures. She offered to betray Antony's remaining supporters. She even offered to become Octavian's mistress. All of it was a performance, designed to buy time until August 12th. Octavian, suspicious but greedy, allowed her to remain in the tomb. He posted guards but didn't force entry. He wanted those treasures intact. Then, on August 10th, Cleopatra made a strange request. She asked to visit Antony's grave to perform funeral rites. Octavian agreed, but sent heavy guard. What happened at that grave has been debated for 2,000 years. Witnesses say Cleopatra performed a ritual that made hardened Roman soldiers step back in fear. She spoke in languages that predated human civilization. She made offerings of substances that seemed to burn without consuming, and then she said something that one guard recorded. "2 more sunsets, my love. Then forever." She returned to her tomb that evening. She ordered a feast, figs, wine, and delicacies from across Egypt. She bathed in milk mixed with gold dust. She dressed in her most elaborate royal costume. And then, exactly as the sun set on August 12th, exactly as the astronomical alignment reached its apex, Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, did something that changed history forever. Part 10. The Immortal Death. The official Roman report says Cleopatra committed suicide with an asp, an Egyptian cobra. But the Romans who actually entered the tomb told a very different story. A story that the empire spent considerable effort suppressing. There was no snake. There were no wounds on Cleopatra's body. She was found on her golden couch looking not dead but transformed. Her skin had taken on a translucent quality. Her body temperature was impossible, cold to the touch but somehow still flexible. And strangest of all, she was smiling. But here's the detail that Roman officials absolutely did not want public. Cleopatra's body never decomposed. For days, Octavian kept the body on display, expecting it to rot in Egypt's heat. It didn't. The skin remained perfect. The eyes, though closed, seemed to move beneath the lids. Roman physicians examined her and declared her dead, but they couldn't explain why the body showed no signs of decay. After 2 weeks, Octavian ordered the body burned. But according to a letter from a Roman officer named Marcus Scaurus, the fire wouldn't consume her. They piled wood, added oil, created a bonfire that could be seen across Alexandria. Cleopatra's body remained untouched in the center of the flames. Finally, in desperation, Octavian ordered the body sealed in a lead coffin and hidden. The location was kept secret, known only to a select few. But even that wasn't the end of the strangeness. For the next 3 years, Roman soldiers stationed in Egypt reported the same recurring phenomenon. They would see Cleopatra in their dreams, always saying the same thing. The transformation is complete. The return awaits the proper age. Octavian himself, now calling himself Augustus, was plagued by nightmares. He would wake screaming about golden eyes watching him from the shadows. He banned anyone from speaking Cleopatra's name in his presence. He destroyed every statue, every painting, every record of her he could find. But he couldn't destroy the stories. Egyptian priests spoke in whispers about the eternal queen who would return when the stars aligned again. They calculated that this alignment occurred every 2,067 years. The next one? They said it would happen in the year 2037 AD. But here's the truly unsettling part that modern archaeologists discovered. In 1995, a team of researchers using ground-penetrating radar near Alexandria detected an unusual chamber deep beneath the harbor. The chamber matched the dimensions described in ancient texts of Cleopatra's secret tomb. But when they tried to excavate, the Egyptian government suddenly shut down the project. All records were classified. The team was disbanded. One member of that team, speaking anonymously, said they detected something else in that chamber. Metal readings consistent with a lead coffin. And something else, electromagnetic readings that shouldn't exist in an ancient tomb. Readings that suggested something in that chamber was still generating energy, still active, still waiting. But let's go back to the immediate aftermath of Cleopatra's death, because this is where the cover-up really begins. Part 11. The Roman cover-up Augustus knew he had a problem. He had defeated Antony and Cleopatra militarily, but he hadn't won the narrative war. Across the empire, people were telling stories about the queen who had transcended death. Some even claimed to have seen her after her supposed suicide, so Augustus did what any smart dictator would do. He rewrote history. He commissioned poets and historians to create a new version of Cleopatra. In this version, she wasn't a genius who spoke 9 languages and nearly conquered Rome. She was a seductress who used her beauty to corrupt noble Roman men. She wasn't a master strategist who predicted the future. She was a witch who used black magic. The propaganda was so effective that it lasted 2,000 years. Even today, when you picture Cleopatra, you probably imagine a beautiful woman with heavy eye makeup, not a multilingual genius who understood advanced mathematics and astronomy. But Augustus made one crucial mistake. He let one man live who knew the truth, a man who would eventually write it down, though in code. That man was Nicholas of Damascus, Cleopatra's court historian. He had been present for many of her rituals. He had seen the secret chambers in the library. He knew about the transformation ritual. Nicholas wrote a history of Cleopatra that he hid within a larger work about plant medicine. Using a cipher based on ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, he embedded the real story. For centuries, scholars thought his work was just about herbs and remedies. But in 1978, a linguist named Sarah Chen cracked the code. What she found was explosive. According to Nicholas, Cleopatra hadn't failed. The transformation had worked, but not in the way she expected. Instead of physical immortality, Cleopatra had achieved something different. Consciousness transfer. Her mind, her essence, her very being had been preserved in what Nicholas called the eternal frequency, a dimension outside normal space and time. And she wasn't alone. Antony was there too, just as she had planned. 2 consciousnesses bound together in an eternal dance, waiting for the right conditions to return to physical form. Nicholas wrote that Cleopatra had told him the specific conditions needed for the return: a descendant of the Ptolemaic bloodline, the correct astronomical alignment, and most importantly, someone who understood the science behind the magic. Here's where things get genuinely creepy. The Ptolemaic bloodline didn't die with Cleopatra. Her daughter, Cleopatra Selene, survived and was married to King Juba II of Mauritania. They had children. Those children had children. The bloodline spread across North Africa into Spain through Europe. Genealogists have traced probable descendants of Cleopatra living today. They number in the thousands, maybe tens of thousands. Most have no idea of their heritage, but somewhere among them is someone who carries not just Cleopatra's DNA, but the specific genetic markers she believed were necessary for the transformation. And remember that astronomical alignment that happens every 2,067 years? The one that Egyptian priests calculated would next occur in 2037? Astronomers have confirmed it. On August 12, 2037, the exact same celestial configuration that existed at Cleopatra's death will occur again. The same planetary positions, the same stellar alignments, the same electromagnetic conditions, but surely this is all just myth and superstition, right? Ancient people believing in magic that doesn't exist? Well, here's the thing. Part 12. The modern discoveries in 2019. Something happened that mainstream media barely covered, but sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. A team excavating near Taposiris Magna, a temple west of Alexandria that Cleopatra built, discovered a series of underground tunnels. These weren't normal tunnels. They were lined with a material that shouldn't have existed in ancient Egypt, a type of limestone mixed with minerals that create natural electromagnetic fields. At the center of this tunnel system, they found a chamber, and in that chamber, they found something that officially doesn't exist, because the Egyptian government immediately classified the discovery. But one of the archaeologists, Dr. Maria Santos, leaked some information before being silenced. She said they found evidence of advanced technology, not alien technology, human technology that was thousands of years ahead of its time. Specifically, they found what appeared to be a crude but functional battery system, similar to the Baghdad battery but far more sophisticated. They found mirrors arranged in patterns that could focus and amplify light in ways that resembled modern lasers, and most disturbingly, they found human remains that showed signs of deliberate electromagnetic exposure, the kind of exposure you'd expect from someone trying to alter their consciousness. Dr. Santos's final message before disappearing from public view was chilling. Cleopatra wasn't practicing magic. She was practicing science we're only beginning to understand. This connects to something even stranger. In the 1960s, the CIA ran a program called Project Gateway. Officially, it was about using meditation and consciousness techniques for intelligence gathering. Unofficially, it was about something much weirder: the possibility of consciousness existing independently of the physical body. Guess what historical figure kept appearing in their research? Guess whose techniques they were trying to replicate? That's right, Cleopatra. The CIA documents released in 2003 reference ancient Egyptian consciousness transfer techniques and specifically mention the Cleopatra Protocol, though most of the details remain redacted. But here's what we can piece together. The CIA believed that consciousness was a form of energy that could be preserved and transferred. They believed the ancient Egyptians had discovered this, and they believed Cleopatra had perfected it. Now you might think this is all coincidence. Ancient myths mixing with modern conspiracy theories. But there's one more piece of evidence that's genuinely hard to explain away. Epilogue: The Impossible Proof in 2021. A French expedition using advanced underwater scanning technology made a discovery in Alexandria's harbor that shouldn't exist. They found a sealed chamber exactly where ancient texts said Cleopatra's real tomb would be. The chamber was still watertight after 2,000 years. An engineering feat that modern builders would struggle to replicate, but that's not the impossible part. This impossible part is what their instruments detected inside the chamber: heat signatures, electromagnetic activity, and strangest of all, patterns in the electromagnetic field that resembled brainwaves. Active brainwaves. In a tomb that had been sealed for 2 millennia, the Egyptian government immediately took control of the site. The French team was sent home. Their equipment was confiscated, and officially, they found nothing. But one of the team members, speaking on condition of anonymity, said something that will haunt me forever. Whatever is in that tomb, it's not dead, it's waiting. So here's the final twist that brings our entire story full circle. Remember how Cleopatra predicted her own fate? How she knew exactly when Caesar would die? How she always seemed to be one step ahead of everyone? What if she saw this moment too? What if she knew that one day humanity would develop the technology to understand what she had done? What if the entire story, her rise, her relationships with Caesar and Antony, even her supposed death, was all part of a larger plan that's still unfolding? Think about it. We live in an age where consciousness upload is being seriously discussed by scientists, where electromagnetic manipulation of the brain is a real medical treatment, where the line between life and death is blurrier than ever. What if Cleopatra knew this time would come? What if she's been waiting for exactly this moment in human history, when we finally have the knowledge to complete her transformation? August 12, 2037 is only 13 years away. The astronomical alignment is already beginning to form. Somewhere in the world, descendants of Cleopatra's bloodline are living their normal lives, unaware of their heritage, and beneath Alexandria's waters, in a chamber that generates impossible energies. Something that was once Cleopatra continues to wait. The question isn't whether this story is true. The question is, what happens when that wait ends? Because if even half of what I've told you is real, if Cleopatra really did discover a way to preserve consciousness, if she really is waiting for the right moment to return, then everything we think we know about life, Death and the nature of existence is about to change. And the craziest part? The part that should terrify everyone? She won't be coming back alone. Antony is with her. And according to those ancient texts, they're not the only ones. The Order of the Inseparable Death had dozens of members. All of them underwent the same ritual. All of them are waiting in that same eternal frequency. Imagine it, the greatest minds of the ancient world, preserved for 2,000 years, learning and growing in a realm outside our reality, preparing to return with knowledge and power we can't even comprehend. Hollywood turned Cleopatra into a love story. History turned her into a cautionary tale. But the truth? The truth is that Cleopatra might be the most dangerous woman who ever lived. Not because of what she did in the past, but because of what she's about to do in the future. And if you think this sounds impossible, remember this. Every single thing I've told you is based on historical records, archaeological discoveries, and documented evidence. The Romans tried to bury this story. Modern governments are still trying to suppress it. But you can't hide the truth forever, especially when that truth is actively working to reveal itself. Cleopatra once said, "I will not be triumphed over." 2,000 years later, that statement might be more than just defiant last words. It might be a promise that's about to be kept. So the next time you see a documentary about Cleopatra or watch a movie about her legendary romance, remember what you learned here. Remember that the real story is far stranger, far more dangerous, and far from over. Because Cleopatra didn't just seduce Rome, she transcended death itself, and she's coming back. The only question is, will humanity be ready when she does? I guess we'll find out in 13 years. Until then, pay attention to the signs. Watch for the patterns. And whatever you do, don't dismiss the ancient wisdom as mere superstition. Because sometimes, what we call magic is just science we don't understand yet. And Cleopatra? She understood it all.